I'm back. Welcome to I Feel Fat Today. I'm your host, Kelly Taylor. We are back. Wow, we did it. Finally, a Friday in which your YouTube and podcast RSS feeds have been graced with a new episode of I Feel Fat Today. I promised I would be back mid-September, and here I am, returning near the end of the month. So we hit our target? No, not at all. But hey, I'm back and we're doing it. Okay, so why I was gone. Why did I take a break from the podcast? We went a few weeks. I think we went a little over a month of not having shows. And well, okay, first I want to point out if while I'm talking, it looks or sounds like I'm reading off a script. It's because I likely am. I Something with grief that I've noticed is that it's hard for me to call in information and remember the thing I was going to say. And so I really wrote everything down to keep me on track. So it's a better listening experience for you. So just want to point that out. But why why was I gone? So anyone who follows me personally on Instagram will know that why I took a break. But I feel given my return, I should shed light as to why I was gone. And that reason is due to the absolutely devastating news that my boyfriend, Joe, he's been on a few episodes of the show before, he unexpectedly lost his stepfather. It was very sudden. It came out of nowhere. And it was a cardiac event. Something that happens where you just have a heart attack and then everyone's lives have changed. So on Saturday, August 10th, Joe got a call from his mom that just completely rocked our world. And in the fallout of what happened, I have never had to deal with an unimaginable sadness and anxiety like I have experienced in quite some time. I have experienced the loss of a loved one, both on a friend level and on a family level, but certainly not at this um, level. Because it's Joe and I are not married; we're dating, but we just celebrated 3 years together, and so it really felt like I lost my father-in-law, um, and that was very difficult. So, um, navigating the world now, it just feels like I have this cloud following me around, and it's been challenging. The lingering anxiety that I initially was dealing with made it so that I could only really be in full collapse, and everything went dark for a little. And now um, everything went dark for a little while. And I also now had to deal with this new anxiety of always worrying about someone dying unexpectedly. Every phone call, every text I get that's at all open ended, I fear that some kind of devastating news is on the other end. Um, and I think above all else, it's the trauma that has been left on me from this that okay, that really makes it sound like I'm making this about me because like a lot of people are very devastated at the loss of this, but I'm just saying personally my experience is um it was a rough go, but I'm feeling more clear and more grounded, and I think the energy in this apartment has changed for the better. And you kind of just get used to this new normal, which is like the weirdest thing to say. And I think that there will be milestones that come up in life that will make the passing of Steve um really painful. But at this point we just have to look to how grateful we are that we had him in our lives. And if you're fortunate enough to have the belief that when people you had a close relationship with pass away, that they're now a part of your sort of spiritual guide team, then it helps continue with your life. Yeah. Um, Something that I didn't realize, um, I realized, I really realized that when something devastating happens to me, I need to fully retreat. And I did that in every aspect of my life. So on August 10th, we got that call and everything went to a full stop. And it was in that happening, I realized how much I do, you know, a full time day job, um, doing comedy at night, having voice over work that I was doing during the day, walking dogs during the day, like just so many plates spinning. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And it really made me see how much I do, which was a weird sort of way to stop and realize, you know, good, bad, or indifferent. And uh what was the other thing I was gonna say? See, I didn't write it down and now it's like hard for me to remember it. Um, Whatever, I guess it's not that important. But I am getting back to things, you know. Joe and I had a fly out to California to see Joe's mom and, you know, just sort of be with her for the week and do some services out there. And once I got back from California, you know, I got back into work and then that was all I could focus on. You know, I didn't do any acting class, I didn't do voiceover work, I didn't do dog walking, I didn't do comedy. I literally haven't gotten on stage to do comedy in over a month at this point, which is weird because I've never gone that long. And that is a whole other thing I feel like I'm grieving, which is ridiculous because I'm literally probably going to get on stage after recording this. But a lot goes into it. And so now we're getting back into things. I'm officially back at acting class as of this week. And yeah, we're moving things along. We're doing it. So I really sat and I asked myself the question, how do people that have responsibilities outside of their single self, how do they live their life when they're experiencing grief? Like the thing that kept coming to mind is, how do people have kids and experience grief? And so later on in the episode, I have an article from the New York Times that I want to read about um, grief's effect on a person's physical body. And yeah, okay. So before I get into that, I do want to talk about the full moon eclipse in Pisces that we just had. Now, I am not completely well versed in all of the signs and all of the lunar cycles, but I definitely love learning about them, and some resonate with me more than others. Like every month, every 28 days, we have a full moon. And sometimes they're just, you know, it's like, oh, the moon looks sick, you know, and maybe I'll, you know, do some journaling or something. But I don't always participate in rituals. But everyone on TikTok was saying that the full moon that we just had on the 17th of September is really powerful. And what you do under this full moon will shape the next 2.5 years. And based on everything I just told you a few minutes into recording this podcast, I definitely had the desire to have the next 2.5 years of my life be smoother, a little bit different, you know. So I participated in some full moon rituals. And so Tuesday night, I dedicated my evening to full moon rituals, which was, it's really just a new age way of saying I tidied my house and I journaled. But really, I did some shadow work and looked at what I needed to cleanse from my life. And it really helps me take stock of how I'm doing currently and what needs to be worked through still in order for me to move forward, not just in the, not just in the space of, grief, but just like, what do I want my day to day to look like? What do I want my future to look like? What do I want right now? So that was really great. And you may be someone listening to this that thinks the full moon energy and horoscopes are stupid. But I think at the end of the day, it can help me or whoever others be on a path um that be on a path to betterment, because of the structures of the moon cycles and what the moon energy provides. So if basically if the full moon lunar eclipse means nothing, at least my apartment is clean and I feel less anxious because I journaled my feelings. um so try that, and believe me, I fully believe that the energy of the full moon lunar eclipse and the cleansing rituals did their thing, because the very next day I had some major changes happen in my life. And not to leave you on another cliffhanger, but I can't go into what those changes were. But believe me, I will tell you when the time comes. I can't block my blessings by giving you all of the tea now. But when I asked the moon to cleanse toxicity from my life, delivered. It delivered in a big way. So yeah, that was a full moon lunar eclipse. If you're listening to this and you had something, if you yourself kind of looked at the moon, maybe made some moon water, did some journaling, and maybe you didn't do any of those things, and then on Wednesday, you got some significant news that kind of made you take a step back and say, oh, okay, all right, this is a change in what I'm used to. This is something I haven't experienced. I'm really curious. Please let me know. Okay. So, one more thing I want to talk about before I move into the article that I have for today is Remi Bader. So, anybody listening to this probably knows who Remi Bader is, but last year around this time, I showcased a video that Remi had posted to TikTok. And I was reminded that she posted this video because while I was scrolling my phone, this was Tuesday the 17th that I was scrolling my phone. Um, I was scrolling TikTok and she actually reposted what she posted a year ago. And so it was episode 18 where I reviewed a video that Remi posted, and she was clearly upset. Okay, clearly upset. And she spoke about how the comments about her body from people on the internet grew to be too much. And she had decided that she was no longer going to be engaging in discourse around her body or health, including any medications that she, is or isn't taking. And so I saw that as her farewell video to the community of people that enjoy her content as a plus size influencer, because she said without explicitly saying that she is going to do some kind of medical intervention for weight loss. That was what I picked up from the video. So you can go back to episode 18 to see where we took a look at that. And so cut to present day, from when the original video was posted, Remi is pretty much, she looks pretty much like a completely different person. She is much thinner and has not given any kind of insight into any medical means of weight loss that she may or may not have done. She will post the occasional workout video, which if she lost a ton of weight solely by diet and exercise, then great. If she lost weight by doing that and having medical intervention, also great. But now we live in a society in which that's not allowed. And frankly, I'm not sure how I feel about it. Because at the end of the day, it is a free country and you have the right to privacy. But I guess I'm asking myself the question, do you owe it to the community of people that helped build your platform that you are changing course? And in a way, I guess she did by by posting the original video to social media, um, that I had reviewed on the podcast. And it's interesting because I believe I even read an article from, I think it was the New York Times, and I cannot remember what episode it was, but I read an article from the New York Times about just this, like body positive, body neutral influencers then going and losing weight, and what do they owe their community that their platform was built upon, um, in that regard. Like basically what I'm saying there is, do plus size influencers that then decide to go and lose weight owe it to the people that they made money off of, by initially building a platform around loving yourself at every size or whatever the case may be? I don't really know. I don't know. I would love to know your thoughts. So, given the obvious change in her physical appearance, her comments are full of spectators, and she is the subject of many a TikTok video on the how, when, why, where, and what means did she take to lose weight. And she hasn't really offered an explanation outside of posting the occasional workout video. And she is still and posting about how she still struggles with her body on an emotional and a physical level. She posted recently that she is kind of confusing for her. It's kind of confusing for her because she's still too big, and now people see her as too small. Um, and I think her reposting the video to the day from a year ago, declaring her cutting off the public from that portion of her life, is exactly the answer we are going to get, and the answer she's willing to give. On the reposted video, read the caption, 1 year ago today, I was in such a dark place that no one in my life really understood what I was going through. Coming out of this a year later, I feel so much stronger mentally and emotionally, and I stopped letting people's negative opinions of me take over and learned to focus on what I like about me. I simply started putting myself first. If you're broken, you don't have to stay that way. Selena Gomez said it best. Please remember that. Something else I do want to point out is, in the time between her posting a video about the video that we reviewed where she was upset, saying that she cannot handle the comments about her body, and anything she does moving forward in regards to her health and body is not going to be for public consumption. She did go through a breakup. So there is the element of like revenge body in there. So I think that's also something to keep in mind. But what are your thoughts? I would love to know your thoughts on Remi Bader. Did you follow her initially because she was this plus size influencer doing realistic try on hauls from stores like Revolve and high end stores that are pretty much catered to standard sizing? Um, do you champion her for losing the weight? Do you um resent her? What are your feelings? Are you sad to see another influencer get got by the, uh diet culture thinness machine? Um, I will say, posting a picture here, Remi looks very different. Compared to the video that was posted a year ago to where she is now, she looks amazing, and you can argue she looked amazing in both um, bodies, but now she's in the more socially acceptable body, and I think that is what needs to be um sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think the fact that she is in the more socially acceptable body speaks to the larger issue of what we find acceptable. Okay. Now on to our article. I have no idea how long I've been recording. I have no idea how long this episode is going to be. Didn't even mention that this is a solo podcast today. Next week we will be back with a guest. I think Yes. Okay, so I'm going to read this article from the New York Times, and then that'll be it. So, this is the biology of grief. Scientists know that the intense stress of grieving can affect the body in various ways, but much remains a mystery. So this came out in April 22nd of 2021. And we'll get into it. Okay. In 1987, when my 18-year-old son was killed in a train accident, a chaplain and two detectives came to my house to notify me. I didn't cry then, but a wall came down in my mind, and I could do nothing except be polite and make the necessary decisions. When friends and relatives showed up, I was still polite, but the wall had now become an infinite darkness, and I was obviously in shock. So they took over, helping me to eat and notify people and write death notices. I've been thinking a lot about the more than 500,000 people that have died from COVID-19 in the United States. Each of them has left, on average, 9 people grieving. That's more than 5 million people going through the long process of grief. Mania, come on. I was able to say this when I initially read through this. Manisha Patel, a senior business systems analyst in Bensalem, Pennsylvania, lost her father to COVID-19 in June. I have been through the toughest time in my life, she said. I feel heavier and I weigh no more and I eat less. And there's a lot of gray hair I didn't have before. My heart aches for him. It longs for him. It looks for him. Now, that paragraph really spoke to me because it's really weird with your relationship to food during grief. It's I don't really know how to describe it. It's like this for me anyways, it felt like this constant queasiness along with a bottomless pit sort of feeling in my stomach. And I don't really know how to describe that. I'm still working through those feelings, but I am going to be 32 in a few weeks, and I have gray hairs. I have gray hairs. I noticed a whole bunch, like a cluster of them in my hairline, and that freaked me out. I was like, what happened to me? And then I read this and thought, could it have been the grief? Could it have been this traumatizing event causing this to happen? And it was illuminating for me. Okay, moving on. When someone you love dies, experts have a pretty good sense of the path that grief takes through the mind, but only have a general sense of how it progresses through the rest of the body. First is a shock in which you feel numb or intensely sad or angry or guilty or anxious or scatterbrained or not able to sleep or eat or any combination of the above. During those first few weeks, people have increased heart rates, higher blood pressure, and may be more likely to have heart attacks. Over their lifetimes, according to studies done mostly on bereaved spouses, they may have a higher risk for cardiovascular disease, infections, cancer, and chronic diseases like diabetes. Within the first 3 months, research on bereaved parents and spouses show that they are nearly 2 times more likely to die than those not bereaved. And after a year, they are 10% more likely to die. With time, most people stabilize. They begin to learn gradually on their own timeline how to more or less continue in their lives and function in society. But studies suggest that after 6 to 12 months, about 10% of bereaved people have not begun to function better. They get stuck in what's called complicated grief. They stay completely preoccupied with loss and persist in persistent yearning and remain socially withdrawn. Scientists know that grief is not only psychological, it's also physical. They know that it causes the brain to send a cascade of stress hormones and other signals to the cardiovascular and immune systems that can ultimately change how those systems function. But no one knows how those systems act together to create the risks of diseases and even death. Another sidebar here, I do want to say something else that I experienced in grief is just the all over body ache sensation. That was something where I felt like I had the flu without having the sniffles. And my friends were so kind as to get me a massage to help me work through the anxieties I was feeling because I was completely socially withdrawn. I went 2 weeks without seeing anybody. And, that's a red flag because I see a few swaths of my friends, you know, at least once a week. And so they got me a massage and it really felt like I was working out emotions in that intense massage. Just wanted to throw that in there. Okay, continuing on. One reason scientists don't know more about the biology of grief is that only a handful of researchers study it, and they are usually psychologists with biological interests. Mary Frances O'Connor, a psychologist who researches grief at the University of Arizona, studies both the psychology of grief and its biological changes in the laboratory, and is one of the few researchers who straddles both fields. Hybrid science is seldom funded well. Grief is either a disease, grief is neither a disease nor is it classified as a mental disorder. And the main funding agency, the National Institute of Health, has no single established channel for funding it. Nevertheless, researchers have found enough people to take surveys and get blood tests and scans to note some patterns. Chris Fagundes, a psychologist at Rice University, said that that in his own lab, he and his team have found links between grief, depression, and changes to the immune system and cardiovascular systems. In one study published in 2019, he and his team performed psychological assessments on 99 bereaved people about 3 months after their deaths of their spouses, and then took blood samples. Those who experienced higher levels of grief and depression also had higher levels of immune system markers for inflammation. Chronic inflammation can be dangerous, the doctor said. It can contribute to cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and some cancers. In another study of 65 people published in 2018, Dr. Fagundes and his colleagues found that bereaved spouses who had higher levels of markers for inflammation also had what experts referred to as lower heart rate variability, a characteristic that can contribute to elevated risk for cardiovascular disease. Other studies have found effects on the cardiovascular system too. In one published in 2012, researchers measured the heart rates of 28 bereaved people twice, once for 24 hours within the first 2 weeks of their spouse or child's death, and again for the same amount of time 6 months later. They found that their heart rates were initially faster, then returned to normal, suggesting that the bereaved may have been in at least temporarily a higher risk for heart disease. Another study published in 2012 found that those with higher scores of grief assessment tests also had increased levels of cardiovascular clotting factors, possibly raising the risk of developing blood clots. As I read through this and they talk about all these studies, I wonder, how do they get these bereaved people to participate in this study? Like, they tested bereaved people 24 hours within the first 2 weeks of a death of a spouse and child. Like, talk about a weird way to deal with grief, right? My husband died. I'm going to go participate in a science study. I don't know. That's like the main thing people say on true crime documentaries of like, did the husband do it? Did this person do it? Well, they grieved weird. They didn't want to go to any of the fundraisers. They were smiling and happy. They said Amanda Knox was doing yoga poses, and it's like people deal with grief in a weird way, you know? You may be sitting there inconsolable crying, and other people might be doing backflips. It's you, there's it's a it's not a well-funded grief is not a well-funded arm of science, so we don't really know the different ways that people can deal with grief. Feels like a lot of it's anecdotal. Okay, moving on. In one review of 20 studies published in 2020, people who scored higher on psychological measures for grief also had higher levels of certain stress hormones like cortisol and epinephrine. Over time, chronic stress can increase the risk of cardiovascular conditions as well as diabetes, cancers, autoimmune conditions, and depression and anxiety. I didn't mean to laugh, but it's like very, very funny. The trend on TikTok right now is when you're scrolling, about 5 videos back to back will pop up saying, hey, you're not fat. Hey, you're not old. Hey, you're not ugly. You just have high cortisol. What are you going to do about your cortisol face? And it's like, I'm just picturing somebody grieving the loss of a loved one and someone out of nowhere being like, you have cortisol face. Thank you for that. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Can you help me with my cortisol face? I may be sad, but I don't want to be ugly. Sorry. Okay, moving on. Okay, so yeah, sad people have higher levels of stress hormones. Put the studies together and on the whole, Dr. Fagundes said everything starts with the brain. It responds to death and to intense stress in general by releasing certain hormones that fan out into the body, affecting the cardiovascular system and the cells of the immune system. Aside from that, generally, however, the biology of grief has no clear chain of cause and effect that the biology of, say, diabetes has. That's because the goal of these studies is to better understand the griever's risks for disease, not to understand the path of grief through the body. One explanation is with the study of the brain. In 2001, Dr. O'Connor first began imaging the grieving brain, and a handful of similar studies have been done since. In these studies, a person lies immobile on a functional magnetic resonance imaging, an MRI scanner. They go into an MRI scanner, and that looks for certain pictures and listens to certain words. And the machine maps the blood flow to parts of the brain. In one study published in 2003, Dr. O'Connor found 3 areas of the brain that were triggered by words related to grief, like funeral or loss, and a 4th triggered by pictures of the person who died. Some of the brain areas were involved in the experience of pain, others in having autobiographical memoirs. These findings were not world-stopping, Dr. O'Connor said. Like, I'm sure that's what happens in grief. But the responses recorded in another area called the nucleus accumbens, how do you say that? ACCUMBEN. But the responses recorded in another area called the nucleus accumbens were more surprising. This region is the part of the brain's network for reward, the part that responds to, say, chocolate. And it was active only in people with complicated grief. Nobody knows why this is. So Dr. O'Connor theorized that in the continuing yearning of complicated grief, being reminded of a loved one with pictures and words might have the same reward as seeing a living, loving loved one. In regular uncomplicated grieving, the reminder is no longer connected to a living reward, but is understood as a memory of someone no longer here. So it's saying that it flips. where in uncomplicated grief, you see the photo of a loved one that has passed and you feel sad. But in complicated grief, they see the photo of the loved one and it triggers almost a pleasure response, like how chocolate would, because you're understanding the memory of someone no longer here. I'm not smart. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know if that's exactly what it's saying, but that's what I took from that. Okay, almost done. All of these studies, however, have limitations. Many of them are small and haven't been replicated. The researchers also don't have the resources to follow the participants over time to see whether those with higher risks for disease eventually develop a disease. Many studies also are a snapshot of one point in time and will miss the changes that occur in most people over months and years. Studies using fMRI have limits all their own too. A lot of things could make the areas light up, said Dr. O'Connor said. And the same thing might not make the same areas light up in everyone or in one person over time. So yeah, so that's why this is so part of the reason why it's so hard to study. They can't follow people along in their life. That person may experience more grief over time. That person may change their diet completely and now their blood levels are completely out of whack because of something outside of the grief entirely. So that's interesting and I think something important to point out. Grief biology and psychology is, of course, the result of another hard to study case state, human attachment or love. Humans are predisposed to forms of loving bonds, Dr. O'Connor said. And as soon as you do, your body is loaded and cocked for what happens when that person is gone. So all systems that functioned well now must accommodate the person's absence. For most people, the systems adjust. Our bodies are amazing resilient, she said. In a recent issue of the Research Digest Up to Date, medical doctors outlined the most current scientific studies on bereavement. One way to think about grieving, they said, is that the feeling of connection to the person who died gradually moves from preoccupying the mind to residing comfortably in the heart. I'm unsure about the word comfortably, but yes, I'm no longer preoccupied. Now, 34 years after my son's death, I'm back in charge, and the pain never quite goes away. Then neither does love. So I loved that article. I thought that it was really interesting. I mean, I, of course, resonated with because on a biological level, I was dealing with grief. My loved one, Joe, Joe was dealing with grief. And so it just was, there was a lot of grieving happening. And yeah, so I'm back. I'm back doing the podcast that no one listens to. I appreciate you that's listening, but what do I got to do to make people listen to this? That was such an interesting article. Should I do mukbangs? Is that what you sick fucks want? You want me to do a mukbang? You want me to just sit on here and eat something greasy and gross for your enjoyment? Is that what's going to get people viewing my YouTube? You sick freaks. Anyways, I'm not going to do that. Last thing I'll say before I sign off is if you are grieving, fuck what people say. Do what you got to do. Hopefully you're speaking with a therapist. I'm lucky to already be on a weekly basis with my therapist. I can't imagine having, something like grief happen to me when and not have a therapist to speak with. But don't worry about what your fucking boss says. Don't worry about if you have like old school people in your life, like grandparents or something that think like that don't miss work for anything. If your grandpa who wasn't even at the hospital because he was working when your, grandma made your mom or, gave birth to your mom, don't listen to what he has to say about you taking time off of work to grieve. We live in a really difficult society as it is. It's so hard to survive as it is that when something really knocks you off your rocker, take the time that you need, journal, drink water, relax, maybe have half a Xanax if that's something that's available to you, and feel and breathe. And you will come out on the other side, even though it doesn't feel like you will. And I am really excited to be back. I thank everybody for their patience. And I only lost one YouTube subscriber in the time of me not posting. So, real exciting stuff. And I didn't go through my spiel of liking and follow. Just please subscribe to YouTube, please. And I'll talk to you next Friday. Bye.